The golden rays of the early morning sun spilled across the open fields of my farm, painting everything in warm hues. Birds chirped in the distance, and the occasional rustling of leaves hinted at the presence of the gentle creatures that called my land home. Among them was a particularly special resident, a magnificent 10-point buck named Atlas. Atlas wasn't just any deer. He was part of a wildlife research program in partnership with the local university. With a GPS tracker around his neck, he was monitored to study migration patterns and ecological changes. Over the years, he had become a familiar sight on my property, often seen grazing near the tree line or drinking from the pond at dusk. Life on the farm had always been peaceful, at least until Karen moved into the neighborhood. She wasn't just any Karen. She was the Karen, the self-appointed head of the local HOA, despite my farm being well outside their jurisdiction. That never stopped her from trying to impose ridiculous rules, claiming my farm was an eyesore, or that my livestock made the area look unkempt. One crisp autumn morning, as I sipped my coffee on the porch, I heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot echoing through the trees. My heart stopped. Hunting was strictly prohibited on my land, and I had always made sure my fences and posted signs made that clear. Dropping my mug, I grabbed my jacket and rushed towards the woods, dread curling in my stomach. As I approached, I saw a figure standing triumphantly over something on the ground. Karen, dressed in full camo gear, held a rifle in one hand and her phone in the other, snapping pictures. My stomach turned to ice when I saw what lay at her feet: Atlas. The beautiful buck, the pride of my land and an integral part of the research project, lay lifeless in the dirt. She grinned as she saw me. "Oh, don't look so shocked. I finally took care of that ugly deer you kept whining about." She kicked Atlas's lifeless body lightly with her boot. "Honestly, I'm doing you a favor. This thing was always lurking around." I could barely process what I was hearing. My fists clenched and a white-hot fury bubbled in my chest. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I growled, my voice dangerously low. Karen scoffed. "Relax, it's just a deer. Besides, I checked. There's no HOA rule against hunting." I took a deep breath, trying to contain the storm brewing inside me. She had no idea that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. And she certainly had no idea that the GPS tracker around Atlas's neck had just recorded everything. Karen laughed, completely oblivious to the trouble she had just walked into. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and pulled out her phone again, snapping more pictures. "I think I'll get this one mounted," she mused. "Would look great in my living room, don't you think?" My hands trembled, not with fear, but with pure, unfiltered rage. I took a step forward, eyes locked onto her with an intensity that finally made her pause. "That ugly deer you just killed," I said through gritted teeth, "was part of a university wildlife research project. It had a GPS tracker, and you just got caught poaching on private property." Karen blinked, her smug expression faltering for a split second before she scoffed. "Oh, please, no one's going to care about some stupid research deer. It was on my property when I shot it." I pointed at the fence just a few feet away, the bright red, "No trespassing" signs glaring back at her. "Your property?" I said coldly. "That fence line right there says otherwise. You crossed onto my land and illegally killed a protected animal." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, but she quickly masked it with another eye roll. "Oh, come on. Who's even going to know? I'll just get rid of the collar and say I found it wandering." She reached down, fingers grasping at the GPS tracker around Atlas's neck. I smirked. Too late. That thing records everything in real time. Location, movement, even audio. Karen froze. Slowly, she looked up at me, her eyes narrowing. "You're bluffing." I pulled out my phone and tapped a few buttons, bringing up the university's tracking app. There it was, Atlas's final recorded location, the moment he went still, and the last few minutes of audio from his collar. I turned up the volume, and her own voice crackled through the speaker. "I finally took care of that ugly deer you kept whining about." Panic flashed across her face. You can't prove that was me," she stammered. I tilted my head. "Well, the GPS shows exactly where he was when he was shot on my land, and the audio, that's your voice bragging about it." Oh, and let's not forget, trespassing and poaching are both crimes. Want to guess what happens next? She opened her mouth, then closed it, her confidence crumbling. I could see the gears turning in her head, desperately searching for a way out. Look, she said, her tone suddenly shifting. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Maybe we can, I don't know, work something out. I folded my arms, raising an eyebrow. You mean like how you worked out illegally hunting on my farm? Yeah, no, you're in deep, Karen, and trust me, you will regret this. For the first time since I'd met her, Karen looked genuinely nervous. But she had no idea just how much trouble she was in. Yet, Karen's fake bravado was slipping fast, but she still clung to the hope that she could weasel her way out of this. She forced a laugh, though it sounded shaky. Okay, so maybe I made a little mistake, she said, stepping away from Atlas's body. But let's not blow this out of proportion. I mean, it's just a deer. How much trouble could I really be in? I smiled. Oh, I'd say a lot. Karen's eyes darted between me and the GPS tracker still strapped to Atlas's neck. I could see her scheming, her mind racing through possible ways to turn this around. Well, she huffed, crossing her arms, who's to say I even knew it was a research animal? That thing could belong to anyone. I sighed, shaking my head. Karen, you literally said, I finally took care of that ugly deer you kept whining about. That's pretty clear evidence that you knew exactly what you were doing. Her face twitched. That doesn't mean anything. I leaned in slightly. Oh, and let's not forget, poaching on private land is a felony in this state. That means fines, possibly jail time, and oh yeah, the university is going to be very interested in pressing charges. That got her. She paled, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Jail time, she squeaked. Oh yeah, I said, enjoying the panic creeping into her expression. And don't forget about the Wildlife Conservation Board. You know, the people who really don't take kindly to illegal hunting. They're gonna love this little stunt. Karen took a deep breath, then squared her shoulders. Fine, she snapped. How much? I blinked. Excuse me. She scoffed. How much money do you want to just forget about this? I'll pay you. I let out a slow, disbelieving laugh. You think this is something you can buy your way out of? Why not? She said, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Everyone has a price. I stared at her for a moment, then simply shook my head. You really don't get it, do you? I said, my voice low. This isn't just my problem. You didn't just shoot any deer. You killed an animal that was being studied by a university. You committed multiple crimes in broad daylight, and you left behind more evidence than a toddler caught sneaking cookies. Karen swallowed hard. So, what, you're gonna turn me in? I smirked. Oh, Karen, you have no idea what's coming. For the first time, she looked genuinely scared, and she should be. Because I wasn't just going to turn her in. I was going to make sure she felt every single consequence. Karen was still standing there, shifting nervously, but I could see her mind working overtime. She wasn't sorry, just scared of getting caught. That made this even better. I wasn't just going to report her. I was going to make sure this stuck to her like a stain she could never scrub off. I took one last look at Atlas, anger simmering beneath my skin. That deer had trusted this land to be safe. He had trusted me to keep it that way. And Karen, she had waltzed in and killed him just for the thrill of it. She needed to pay. I pulled my phone back out and scrolled through my contacts, stopping on the number for Dr. Reynolds, the lead researcher for the university's wildlife program. Karen's eyes widened as I hit the call button. Wait, you don't have to. Hey, Doc, I said, cutting her off. Yeah, it's me. Listen, we've got a problem. Atlas has been shot. There was silence on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. Shot? Are you sure? Oh, I'm sure, I said, locking eyes with Karen, who was now biting her lip. And you won't believe who did it. Karen shook her head rapidly, mouthing no, 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 but I just kept talking. Yeah, my lovely HOA neighbor decided she'd do a little illegal hunting this morning, trespassed onto my property, shot Atlas, and even bragged about it. I let that sink in before adding, and here's the best part. His GPS tracker caught the whole thing, audio included. Dr. Reynolds swore under his breath. This is bad, really bad. That deer was a key part of our study. We need to report this immediately. That's what I was thinking. Karen was shaking now. Wait, please, there has to be another way. I ignored her. I'll send over the GPS data and the audio file. And Doc, make sure the wildlife authorities hear about this too. You got it, he said grimly. I'll start making calls. That woman just made the worst mistake of her life. I hung up and turned back to Karen, who looked like she was about to be sick. Well, I said, crossing my arms, I'd say you have about an hour before this really starts blowing up. Better start practicing your apology for the news cameras. Karen gasped, news cameras. I grinned. Oh yeah, a poaching scandal involving a protected research animal. This is definitely making the news. Her mouth fell open, and I could see the realization hit her like a freight train. She wasn't just looking at fines or a slap on the wrist. This was going to ruin her. But I wasn't done yet. Now it was time to make sure the whole town knew exactly who Karen really was. Karen was unraveling before my eyes. Her confidence had crumbled, replaced by sheer panic. But she still had no idea just how bad this was going to get. I walked back toward my truck, leaving her standing there like a deer caught in the headlights. Where are you going?" she stammered. I didn't bother looking back. Oh, just making sure everyone in town hears about what you did. She let out a strangled laugh, trying to compose herself. Oh, come on. This is your fault for letting that ugly thing wander around. Maybe if you'd fenced it in better, this wouldn't have happened. I stopped dead in my tracks and turned around slowly. She must have realized she had just dug her own grave even deeper, but it was too late. I gave her a long, cold stare before pulling my phone back out. You know, I said, opening my text messages, you love sending out those ridiculous HOA emails about grass lengths and aesthetics. I think it's time for the community to get a real update from you. Her eyes widened. Wait, what are you doing? I smirked as I typed. Loudspeaker urgent community announcement. Loudspeaker. Karen, your self-appointed HOA queen, has just been caught trespassing and illegally killing a GPS-tracked research deer from the university's wildlife program. GPS data and audio evidence confirm she was fully aware of what she was doing. Wildlife officials and law enforcement have been notified. Expect to see her face in the news soon. I hit send. Karen's phone buzzed in her pocket, then it buzzed again, and again, and again. She scrambled to pull it out, her face draining of color as she saw the message spreading like wildfire. You can't do this, she shrieked. I folded my arms. I think I just did. And that was just the beginning. I had already forwarded the GPS and audio data to the university and the local wildlife authorities. I also had a few friends in the local news circuit who loved a juicy scandal, especially one involving a self-righteous HOA tyrant getting her comeuppance. Karen was about to become famous for all the wrong reasons. Her hands shook as she tried to type on her phone. I'll sue you for slander, she shouted. I chuckled. It's not slander if it's true. She let out a frustrated scream, then spun around and stomped toward her house. But she wouldn't be able to hide for long, because in just a matter of hours, the entire town, no, the entire state, was going to know exactly what she had done. And soon, there would be nowhere left for her to run. The next few hours played out exactly as I had planned. Karen must have thought she could contain the fallout, but the moment my message hit the community email list, it spread like wildfire. By lunchtime, my phone was buzzing non-stop with messages from neighbors, local hunters, and even a few HOA members who, despite usually siding with Karen, were not thrilled about her illegal hunting spree. And then the real fun began. I was out near my barn when I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. A convoy of vehicles pulled up, 2 marked trucks from the Wildlife Conservation Department, 1 sheriff's cruiser, and just as I'd hoped, a news van from the local station. Karen came storming out of her house the moment she saw them, waving her arms frantically. This is insane. You have no proof, she shrieked. One of the wildlife officers, a grizzled man named Officer Delgado, held up his tablet, displaying a GPS map with the exact location where Atlas had been shot. "Actually, ma'am, we have plenty of proof." The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Lisa, stepped forward with a microphone. "Karen, do you have any statement about illegally hunting a protected research deer on private property?" Karen's face twisted in rage. "I didn't know it was some stupid research project. I was just—" She clamped her mouth shut when she realized she was about to incriminate herself on live TV. Officer Delgado folded his arms. "Ma'am, even if you didn't know, you still trespassed, illegally discharged a firearm on private land, and killed a protected animal. That's 3 separate offenses." The sheriff, a burly man named Deputy Calloway, stepped forward. "Karen Thompson, you're under investigation for criminal trespassing and unlawful hunting. We're going to need you to come down to the station." Karen's jaw dropped. "This is ridiculous. I'll have your jobs for this. I'll call my lawyer." Delgado smirked. "You might want to do that. You'll need one." The news crew captured every second of Karen's meltdown as she screamed about how this was all a misunderstanding and totally unfair. But when Deputy Calloway guided her toward the cruiser, she finally realized this was real. And then, to make things even better, her phone buzzed again. She glanced down at it, and whatever she saw made her let out a strangled gasp. "I didn't even have to ask. I already knew." The university had officially filed charges. She was done. As she was loaded into the squad car, I leaned against my fence, watching the spectacle with a satisfied smile. She had spent months making my life miserable with her HOA nonsense. But today, justice had been served. And the best part, Karen had no one to blame but herself. Karen's meltdown continued inside the squad car. Through the rolled-down window, I could hear her shrieking at the deputy. "You can't do this to me. I'm the head of the HOA." Deputy Calloway sighed, clearly already done with her nonsense. "Ma'am, the HOA has no authority over wildlife laws or trespassing laws." The news crew was still rolling, capturing every moment as Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. Meanwhile, the wildlife officers secured Atlas's GPS collar as evidence, confirming that all the data matched my report. Then the cherry on top, her phone rang. Through the window, I saw the name flashing on the screen, HOA President, Reel 1. Karen hesitated, then snatched up the call. "Hello, listen, this is all." Whoever was on the other end cut her off hard. I couldn't hear the exact words, but judging from how Karen's face immediately drained of color, it was not a pleasant conversation. I could just imagine the real HOA president laying into her about how she had just made their entire association look bad. Then she screamed, "You can't fire me." A pause, then her face crumpled. Oh, that's good." The HOA had just officially kicked her out. I couldn't help but chuckle as she hung up and threw her phone against the seat. First, she lost her credibility. Then, she lost her legal defense. And now, she had lost the only power she thought she had over this community. The news reporter, Lisa, turned to me next. "So, how do you feel about today's events?" I shrugged, playing it cool. "Well, I'd say justice was served. Poaching's a serious crime and nobody's above the law, not even self-important HOA board members." Lisa smirked. "Do you think Karen has learned her lesson?" I glanced at the squad car, where Karen was now sitting in shocked silence, her whole world crumbling around her. "Oh, I know she has," I said. "And if she hadn't yet, she would soon enough." A week later, peace had finally returned to my farm. The leaves had started to turn, the air was crisp, and without Karen's constant nagging, life felt a whole lot quieter. The fallout from her little poaching stunt had been spectacular. The university had gone all in with their charges, making sure Karen faced the full weight of the law. The wildlife department hit her with massive fines for hunting a protected research animal, and trespassing charges only added to her legal troubles. But the real kicker, the news coverage had turned her into a local pariah. Everywhere she went, People recognized her as the Karen who illegally hunted a research deer for fun. The HOA had completely disowned her, stripping her of any power she thought she had. Last I heard, most of the community had turned against her too, embarrassed to be associated with her. And then the final poetic justice. Her husband packed up and left. Turns out he wasn't too keen on being married to the town's most infamous criminal. So now, Karen was stuck in a house she could barely afford, drowning in legal fees and completely alone. As for me, I was back to enjoying my peaceful farm, free from HOA nonsense. The university had even reached out to thank me, offering to include me in future conservation projects. We were already working on placing a few new GPS-tagged deer in the area, this time with even more advanced tracking. I leaned back on my porch, sipping my coffee as I watched the sun dip below the trees. A few deer wandered near the tree line, cautious but comfortable, knowing they were safe here. And as for Karen, well, let's just say she'd never be stepping foot on my land again. Justice had been served, and life was good.